The morning began like any other, with the slow hum of the espresso machine filling my kitchen and the smell of freshly ground beans warming the air. I took the first swallow, deep, dark, perfect, and grimaced the moment the artificial sweetener hit my tongue. It was the same brand Jackie insisted on buying to keep the office budget healthy, yet it tasted like someone had dissolved a melted plastic spoon into my mug. I stared at the cup with profound betrayal. Why do I keep doing this to myself? I muttered it into the quiet kitchen, as if the cabinets or the sunlight slicing across the counter could offer an answer. The artificial stuff was supposed to protect my teeth and help my metabolism, but all it ever did was make my mornings feel synthetic, like even my rituals had been infiltrated. The second swallow didn't taste any better, but I forced it down while scrolling through the email that had ruined my mood even before coffee. Another message from the copyright office. Another delay. Another request for documentation I'd already submitted twice. A government that couldn't process a simple rights claim in less than 6 months had no business policing anything, much less creativity. If incompetence were an export, the federal government would be the richest entity on the continent. Instead, it was busy hiring people who seemed allergic to both deadlines and reasoning. That strange wave of progressive reforms sweeping through the agency had only slowed everything down. Promotions based on ideology instead of competence always did. My phone buzzed. Jackie Stoddard's name lit the screen. I answered on the third ring. "Morning, Jackie. What now?" Her voice came swift, tense. "Boss, you need to come downstairs. There's someone here to see you." "Someone?" "A young lady. She didn't give her name. She just said you need to see her immediately." I sighed, rubbing the bridge of my nose. "Jackie, you know the rules. No walk-ins before." "I know," she cut in, "but you should see her. Really. She's shaken, and she's carrying something. A photo. A photo. Yes. And you might want to sit down before you look at it." That was unusual. Jackie wasn't easily rattled. I took my mug, artificial sweetener and all, and walked downstairs to the office attached to my home in Northridge, Oregon. Jackie stood near the reception desk, her normally immaculate ponytail slightly disheveled. She held a printed photograph in her hand, her knuckles white around the edges. "She left this on the desk," Jackie said quietly, passing it to me. The moment my gaze landed on the image, the world around me narrowed into a single, painful line of memory. It was Sharon, my ex-wife, the woman who had taken everything, trust, family, sanity, and left a crater where my life used to stand. And beside her in the photo were two girls, twin girls, about 19 or 20, with matching smiles and eyes I couldn't look at for more than a second without feeling something tighten in my chest. Those eyes, they were the same color as mine. My breath stalled. Where is she? The girl who brought this." Jackie nodded toward the hallway. "In your office." She didn't want to give her name. "Play the video," I said automatically. "What video?" "You said she had something else. She left a USB stick on your desk." Jackie hesitated. "I didn't want to plug it in without you." "Let's see it." I walked into my office, and the young woman stood as if she'd been carved from silence. Long dark hair, faded denim jacket, eyes that were swollen and red from crying, but focused in a way that made me feel she'd been holding her breath since childhood. She looked like she was bracing for impact. "I'm..." She swallowed hard. "My name is Sandra." I nodded. "And the photo?" "That's me. And my twin sister, Susan." Her voice cracked. "And Sharon is my mother." For a moment, the room tilted. Something cold tightened around my spine as I sank into my chair. Sandra took a trembling breath, and then the flood began. "I found things," she whispered. "Documents. Old papers hidden in the back of a drawer. And a photo with your name on it." I didn't know what to think. I thought my whole life was normal. I thought. She broke off, wiping tears with the back of her hand. "My sister is dying." The words felt like a stone hitting the inside of my chest. "She is less than 2 months without a bone marrow match," Sandra continued. "And I found things that made me wonder if the man we call Dad is even our biological father." Her mouth tightened. "He's not," she said. I showed the doctor the documents. They agreed to run a DNA test. They told me to find you. The edges of the world sharpened in an instant like a shattered window, suddenly refocusing. You think I'm your father? I whispered. Sandra nodded. I don't know, she said honestly, but I knew I had to find out. For Susan, I motioned toward the chair opposite me. Sit, please. She sank into it slowly. Before we do anything, I said, I need to understand what's on the USB drive. Her gaze lifted, frightened but determined. It's my mother. She recorded it before the divorce. Before everything changed, I plugged the USB into my laptop. The folder contained one video file, dated nearly 20 years ago. I clicked play. Sharon appeared on screen, younger, raw, eyes puffy as though she'd been crying for hours. She spoke with a trembling voice, confessing secrets she'd kept buried, apologies she never delivered, truths she chose to let rot in silence. By the end, Sandra was weeping openly. That's the last message she left before she disappeared from our lives, Sandra whispered. And until now, I didn't understand any of it. Where is she now? I asked. Home. Angry. Lost. I don't know. And your father? Her expression darkened. He worked for the CIA. He got you fired from the FBI. I learned that last night. The past slammed into me like a steel door. The betrayal, the humiliation, the forced resignation. Everything suddenly aligned in a way that made my stomach twist. I stood abruptly. Jackie, I called out. She appeared instantly in the doorway. I need you to send copies of everything on this USB drive to the publishers, I said. No tracking, no cloud. I don't want this being intercepted. Use the secure line. Jackie nodded, understanding the urgency. I turned back to Sandra. We're going to run a rapid DNA test, I said, and then I'm taking you to see your sister. I want to meet her. Sandra's eyes widened, shimmering with hope and fear. You'll come? Yes. She covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking as tears spilled again. Why are you crying? I asked softly. Because, she whispered, the moment I saw you, I knew. I just knew. I walked around the desk and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. We'll find the truth, I said. She nodded, choking on relief. Jackie snapped a few discreet photos, the moment, the connection, the unspoken recognition. Those Sandra didn't seem to notice. Within an hour, we were on our way to the clinic. Sandra sat beside me, twisting her hands nervously. At the clinic, the nurse drew my blood first, then Sandra's. We sat in the waiting area, where she finally spoke again. My sister's name is Susan, she said softly. She's always been the stronger one. But she's scared. I've never seen her scared. I'll be there, I promised. No matter what the DNA shows. Sandra blinked hard, holding back tears. Do you have kids? She asked suddenly. No, I exhaled. At least none that I know of. She smiled sadly. You might today. We sat together for long minutes, suspended in a strange limbo between two possible realities. After the clinic, I received a message. Barbara, my sister, wanted to meet Sandra. Strange how news traveled faster than blood could be tested. We drove to Cantel's, a quiet restaurant downtown. Barbara was already there, sitting with her husband, Andrew. When they saw Sandra, both froze. Barbara stood slowly, her hand covering her mouth. My God, she looks like me. Sandra finished with a shy smile. Barbara hugged her without hesitation. Family resembles family, she whispered. I sat down beside them. Sandra is Sharon's daughter. Barbara stiffened. Sharon? You're Sharon? Yes. Andrew's brows rose. And you think? She's waiting for the DNA test, I said. But look at her. Barbara studied Sandra silently, her eyes soft with dawning recognition. You're in the right place, sweetheart, she said. No matter what that test says. Sandra looked overwhelmed, murmuring, thank you. My parents arrived shortly after, Linda and Robert. My mother gasped, pressing her palms together in disbelief. She looks just like the girls in the photo you kept. I always knew Sharon was hiding something. My father crossed his arms skeptically. Let's wait for proof. But even he softened eventually, nodding at Sandra in quiet acceptance. By the end of dinner, Sandra had been welcomed into the family more warmly than I expected. Even my father, who distrusted everything, offered a stiff smile. When we stepped outside, my phone rang. Susan's name flashed on the screen. I answered. Hello. A soft, weakened voice came through. Is it true? Yes, I said. We're working on it. You'll see the video and the results. Can I meet you? I'm coming now. Sandra gripped my arm tightly. Thank you, she whispered. That night, my world, which had been carefully rebuilt after years of betrayal, shifted again. And I knew, deep inside, that nothing would ever be the same. The drive to the hospital was quiet but heavy with emotion. Sandra sat beside me with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, twisting her fingers like she was afraid they might unravel if she let go. Street lights slid across her face as we moved through the city, illuminating the fear and hope warring in her expression. I kept glancing at her, trying to understand the weight she carried. The years of confusion, the lies, the sudden collapse of everything she thought she knew. You don't have to come in if you're not ready, she said softly as we pulled into the hospital parking lot. I'm ready, I replied. If Susan wants to meet me, I'll be there. Sandra nodded, swallowing hard. She looked young and impossibly fragile in that moment. But she was holding herself together for her sister, and that strength reminded me of someone, maybe, or perhaps the person I used to be. We walked through the hospital halls, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Sandra led me to a quiet corner room. Before she could open the door, she turned to me. She's scared. She tries to hide it. Just be gentle, okay? I placed a hand on her shoulder. I will. She pushed the door open. Susan was lying in a hospital bed, pale and impossibly thin, but her eyes, those same familiar eyes, were filled with life the moment she saw Sandra step inside. Then her gaze shifted to me. For a second, she froze. The world held its breath. Then her eyes softened, as if something inside her clicked into place. You came, she whispered. I nodded. I promised I would. Sandra pulled a chair to the bedside and sat close, gripping her sister's hand. I took the other chair, feeling strangely nervous, like a guest in a room where something sacred was happening. Susan studied me quietly. I've seen pictures, she said. Old ones Mom kept. She never let us look for long. What kind of pictures? I asked gently. Ones of you. With her. Before everything went bad. The memories felt like salt on an open wound. I'm sorry you grew up without the truth, I said. Susan gave a tiny smile. I think part of me always knew. Not consciously, but something inside knew. Her voice wavered, but she held my gaze firmly. Sandra says you agreed to the DNA test. I did. And if it's true, if you're our father, I took her hand lightly. It was cold, fragile. Then I'm here for both of you, no matter what. Her eyes filled instantly, but the tears didn't fall. She held them back, breathing shallowly. I don't want to die, she said quietly, voice trembling like a confession. But they said my chances. Stop, Sandra whispered sharply, tears in her own eyes. You're not dying. Not now. Not with everything happening. Susan squeezed her sister's hand weakly, trying to reassure her, even though she was the one fading. A nurse entered, checking the monitors. She glanced at me curiously, then at the girls, but said nothing. When she left, the room fell into a solemn hush. We should let you rest, I said softly. Stay a few minutes more, Susan begged. Please. So we did. I didn't say much. I just sat there, letting her see that I wasn't running, that I wasn't going anywhere. After a long while, Susan's heavy eyelids closed and her breathing steadied. Sandra touched my shoulder. Let's go. We left quietly. In the hallway, she wiped her cheeks and turned to me with a strange mixture of relief and fear. Thank you, she whispered. You didn't have to sit with her. Yes, I did. When we stepped outside, the night had turned cold. Sandra hugged herself, shivering slightly. Do you want to go home? I asked. I don't have a home tonight, she said. Not with Mom yelling. Not with everything. Come with me, I offered. At least until tomorrow. She nodded silently. Back at my place, Jackie greeted us instantly, her phone in her hand. Paul, she said, voice urgent. The DNA results came in. Sandra froze. I felt something heavy settle in my chest. Let's see them, I said. Jackie handed me the printed report. Sandra hovered at my side, breath held so tightly I could hear her heartbeat in the silence. I unfolded the paper. 99.89% probability. The air left my lungs in a rush. Sandra covered her mouth, a broken sound escaping her throat. Tears streamed down her face as she turned and pressed her forehead into my shoulder, sobbing with relief. I wrapped my arms around her gently. "It's okay," I said softly. "I'm here. I'm really here." Jackie sniffed quietly from the doorway, wiping her own eyes. "We need to go back to the hospital," Sandra whispered against my shirt. "Susan needs to know." "We will," I promised. But not yet. She needed time. We all did. The next morning, the house felt strangely alive. Sandra ate breakfast with Jackie, and I overheard them laughing quietly in the kitchen. I realized then how quickly Jackie had become woven into my life. She wasn't just my assistant. She was my anchor. When Sandra finished eating, Jackie stood and dusted crumbs off her hands. "DNA or not," Jackie said warmly, "you're family now." Sandra's eyes softened. "Thank you, Jackie." There was genuine warmth between them, something that eased my heart a little. Later that afternoon, we returned to the hospital. Susan was awake, pale but alert. When Sandra rushed in with the results, Susan's eyes widened. "Is it?" Sandra nodded through tears. "Yes." Susan looked at me, her lips trembling. "Dad." The word hit harder than any blow I'd ever taken in the FBI. I walked to her bedside and gently took her hand. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm your father." Her tears spilled instantly, sliding down her cheeks as she clung to my hand with surprising strength. "I knew it," she sobbed. "I knew it." Sandra hugged us both from the other side of the bed. The three of us stayed like that for a long, silent minute, held together not by years, but by truth finally revealed. When I finally stepped out of the room for air, Jackie was standing in the hallway. "Paul," she said, "you need to hear this." She handed me her phone. On the screen was a message from a contact at the police department. The news leaked. Everyone knows about the DNA results. I exhaled slowly. How bad is it? Bad. Reporters are already outside the hospital. Of course they were. Nothing stayed quiet for long. I returned to Susan's room briefly to reassure her. She was tired, but her eyes sparkled with something I hadn't seen before: hope. When we left the hospital that evening, Barbara came with her husband and my parents to meet Sandra again. They offered her a place to stay for the night, claiming she was too thin and too stressed to be alone anywhere. My family meant well, overwhelmingly well. We all ended up at my parents' house for an impromptu dinner. Sandra sat at the table surrounded by people she'd never known before that week, laughing softly as my mother fussed over her hair and my father asked her about college. "You're staying tonight," my mother insisted. No arguing. Sandra glanced at me uncertainly. "It's okay," I said. "You'll be safe here." She nodded, but her eyes glistened. "It feels strange," she admitted. "Being welcomed." Barbara squeezed her hand. "You belong here." As dinner wound down, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. "This is Investigator Holt from the city police," a voice said. "You're on the news." I figured. Holt continued. "The leak is confirmed. Everything's out. The DNA, your history with Sharon, everything. We can give you a protective detail if needed." "I don't need it yet. Give me time to process." "Fair enough. But you should be aware they're coming." "Who?" "Your former father-in-law. And Arnold." I froze. My grip tightened on the phone. "Understood." When I hung up, Sandra was watching me. "What's wrong?" "Nothing you need to worry about," I said, though worry was already spreading across her face. Late that night, after Sandra went to bed and my parents were cleaning the dining room, I stepped outside to breathe. My father joined me. He didn't say anything at first, just stared out into the dark yard, the faint smell of pine drifting on the air. So, he finally said, "You're a father." "Yes." "You ready for that?" I gave a soft, humorless laugh. "Ready or not, it's here." He clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You'll do fine." The next morning, I met with Investigator Holt and a federal liaison named Chad Gerardo from the FBI. We sat in a small office at the police station, files spread across the table. Holt leaned back, arms crossed. "We're interviewing your former father-in-law today," he said. "Your evidence better be solid." My evidence is rock solid, I replied. I opened my folder and laid out printed copies of documents I'd saved for years. Intercepted messages, anonymous threats, warnings from inside the bureau. Chad flipped through them silently, eyebrows raised. "You've been sitting on this for 2 decades?" he asked. "Yes. And you didn't bring it in earlier?" "There was no one to trust earlier." Chad nodded slowly. "Fair. The interview didn't happen that day, but arrangements were made. And until the legal dust settled, I was placed under official protection. Not because I asked for it, because the situation demanded it. But my mind was already elsewhere with Susan. That afternoon, I returned to her room. Sandra was there, reading aloud from a fantasy novel. Susan looked tired but brighter. "Hey," she greeted me softly. "Hey," I replied. "You holding up?" She nodded, but then her lips trembled. "Are you going to leave? After this is over?" The question stabbed through me. "No," I said firmly. "You're stuck with me now." Sandra exhaled in relief, and Susan smiled weakly. We talked for nearly an hour. She asked me everything: favorite movies, what I did for work now, whether I had pets, whether I could cook. It felt like a lifetime squeezed into a single conversation. When I finally stepped out, a doctor approached me. "We need to prep you for tomorrow," he said, "if you're still willing." "Prep me for what?" "For the bone marrow procedure. The order was approved by the judge this morning." I blinked. "Already? We can't wait." Time isn't on Susan's side. You're the best match. There was no hesitation. "Do whatever you need." For the first time in many years, I felt something real. Purpose. A reason to fight. Later that evening, I met Jackie at the cafeteria downstairs. She looked exhausted but relieved. "I booked us a private jet for after the operation," she said. "You and your mother will need recovery time." "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. And don't argue." I smiled at her, and she blushed faintly. Sandra walked up behind us then, arms crossed, smirking. "You know she loves you, right?" Sandra said. Jackie choked on her drink. "Sandra." I laughed quietly, surprising even myself. But Sandra's words lingered. Back upstairs, I noticed something. Susan had fallen asleep, holding a photo, the printed picture Sandra had brought. In it, Sharon smiled at a version of me I barely recognized. And beside her were 2 little girls, toddlers then, almost indistinguishable. My daughters. My throat tightened. I sat beside her bed for a while, watching her breathing soften. No matter what it took, I was going to fight for her. For both of them. The next day would change everything. Susan lived in a small rented apartment on the east side of Portland, in a narrow building that looked as though a strong wind could topple it. The kind of place people didn't choose unless life had already removed every other option. When Sandra and I walked down the dimly lit hallway, the air smelled faintly of bleach and loneliness. Doors were numbered with fading stickers, not metal plates. Somewhere down the corridor, a baby was crying. And above us, pipes clanged every few minutes, as if the whole building suffered from insomnia. Before we reached her door, Sandra stopped and looked at me. She's not doing well," she whispered. "She hides it, but I see it. She can't climb stairs anymore without losing her breath. She sleeps sitting up because lying down hurts. And she pretends she's fine, so I won't be scared." "She sounds strong," I said quietly. "She's stronger than both of us combined," Sandra murmured, straightening her shoulders. "But today she needs hope." I nodded. Sandra knocked softly. The door opened after several seconds, and there she stood, a mirror image of Sandra, but thinner, paler, with deep shadows under her eyes. Her hair, thick and glossy in the photo from years ago, now hung in a long limp braid. But her eyes, those were alive. Intelligent, bright even through exhaustion. The moment she saw me, she froze. "You," she breathed. "God, it's really you." She covered her mouth as if the sight of me was too much. Tears spilled instantly. She tried to steady herself on the doorframe, but her legs trembled. Sandra rushed forward to hold her up. "It's okay, Susie," she whispered. "He came." "I didn't think he would," Susan choked. "I didn't think anyone would." I stepped closer. "May I come in?" She nodded vigorously, wiping tears with shaky fingers, and stepped aside. The apartment was tidy but sparse. Secondhand couch, mismatched curtains, hand-me-down furniture. A faint medical smell lingered. Antiseptic wipes, supplements, low-sodium meals. On the coffee table sat a stack of medical bills held together by a rubber band stretched to its limit. I saw a half-finished puzzle on the dining table. Flowers, blue sky, maybe 1,000 pieces, but only the border was assembled. "Sorry for the mess," Susan murmured, embarrassed. "It's perfectly fine," I said. Sandra helped her sit on the couch, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. When I sat across from them, the twins exchanged a glance, a silent conversation happening in a language only siblings understood. Susan finally looked at me again. Sandra showed me the picture. And the video. Her voice shook. "Do you know how long we wondered why Mom changed? Why she went from loving us to distant? Angry? Confused?" She swallowed. She wasn't trying to hurt us. She was covering something. Covering, maybe you. I exhaled slowly. "I don't know the truth yet, but we'll find it. The test is processing." "How long?" she asked. "Within 48 hours. The clinic promised to expedite it." She nodded, but disappointment flickered in her eyes. 48 hours meant 2 nights of wondering whether the man sitting in front of her was family or a stranger. "I brought something," I said, reaching into my coat. I pulled out a small, worn photograph. One of the few I had left from my life with Sharon, taken before everything fell apart. She was smiling. I was holding her waist. Soft golden light framed both of us. Susan took it carefully, like it was fragile. "Mom looked happy," she whispered. "She was," I said quietly, "at least in that moment." "What happened?" Sandra asked suddenly. Her tone wasn't demanding, just broken. I hesitated. The truth was jagged, dangerous. But they had lived through the consequences of my silence long enough. "Your father," I said, "worked in intelligence. And he didn't like that Sharon and I were close again. He believed I was a threat to the life he built. So he made sure I lost my career. He fed false reports into the bureau. Convenient lies. And I was pushed out." The twins exchanged a horrified look. "But why?" Susan asked. I think," I said slowly, "he wanted Sharon to need him, to depend on him. And he didn't want anyone else interfering." Sandra clenched her fists. "He still works with government contacts. He still—" Susan coughed suddenly, a rasping fit that made her double over. Sandra immediately moved behind her, rubbing her back. When the cough passed, Susan leaned back, exhausted. "I'm fine," she whispered, waving Sandra off. But she wasn't, and we all knew it. I leaned forward. "Susan, listen to me carefully. No matter what the DNA test shows, I'll do whatever is needed to try to help you. Donor search, private clinics, specialists, whatever it takes." Her eyes filled again. "No one outside our family has ever said that to me." "I'm not outside anymore," I said. For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy, fragile. Then Susan reached out with a trembling hand and placed it on mine. Warm, weak, but determined. "Thank you," she whispered. Sandra broke. She buried her face in her hands and cried quietly. Susan leaned into her, resting her head against her sister's shoulder. Watching them, bonded by survival, betrayal, and fear, I felt something deep inside shift. Something I'd buried since Sharon's departure, since the collapse of my marriage, since losing my career. Responsibility. Connection. A sense that these 2 young women were pieces of a puzzle I'd been missing for nearly 20 years. Susan exhaled shakily. "Sandra told me you went to the restaurant, that your family was there. What did they say?" "They accepted you immediately," I said. My mother practically cried when she saw Sandra's face. Susan smiled weakly. "Your mother must be wonderful." "She is," I said. "You'll meet her soon." "I hope so." The twins exchanged a look, something hopeful and fearful blended into one. After another hour of talking, tentative beginnings, soft laughter, heavy truths, I stood to leave. Sandra walked me to the door. "She's acting stronger than she is," Sandra whispered. "The doctors say she might not make it through next month without a match." I lowered my voice. "We're not waiting for the test results to act. Tomorrow morning, I'll get you both into a specialist clinic. The best one in the state." Sandra stared at me with disbelief. You'd help us that much?" "Yes." "But why?" I met her gaze. "Because no one protected you when you needed it. And because if Susan were my daughter, I would want someone to fight for her. even if the world was against it. Sandra inhaled shakily and nodded, wiping fresh tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." I touched her shoulder gently. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." As I walked down the hallway, I heard Susan's faint voice. "Do you think he's our father?" Sandra answered softly. "I don't need a test to know." The next morning, everything began to change. At 7:14 a.m., I received a call. It wasn't from the clinic. It wasn't from Sandra. It was from a number I hadn't seen in 20 years. "Sharon." I answered slowly. "Hello." Her voice arrived in a whisper, fractured, trembling, as if she'd spent the entire night rehearsing this moment. "I know what you're doing," she said, "and we need to talk. Today, before you see the results. Before everything falls apart." Sharon wanted to meet in a public place. That alone told me everything. She was afraid. We chose a quiet cafe downtown, one of those modern minimalist spots where the furniture looked uncomfortable by design and the baristas looked too tired to care. When I walked in, Sharon was already there, seated in the furthest corner, shoulders tight, fingers wrapped around a cup she hadn't touched. Time had carved lines into her face, fine, pale traces of worry, guilt, fear. Her hair, once always perfectly styled, hung in loose curls, hastily brushed. She looked smaller, dimmer, as if her glow had been slowly stolen over the years. When she saw me, her breath caught. "You came," she whispered. I sat across from her. "You said it was urgent." She nodded, staring into her cup as if searching its surface for courage. "I heard about Sandra and Susan visiting you," she said. "Word travels faster than it should." "They didn't come for drama," I replied quietly. "They came for truth." Sharon flinched as if I'd struck her. "I know." She wrapped her arms around herself. "That's why I'm here. The truth isn't what they think, or what you think." I waited, and then she said the sentence that split the air between us like a wire pulled too tight. "You're not their father." My stomach tightened, but I stayed silent. Sharon inhaled shakily. "But you were supposed to be." I frowned. "Explain." Tears welled in her eyes. She wiped them quickly, ashamed. "I loved you," she whispered. "More than I've ever loved anyone. Even during our worst moments. Even after the lies, the mistrust, the distance. I always thought we'd find our way back. And I knew that if we had a child together, we'd never fall apart." I felt a cold, creeping dread rise inside me. "Sharon, what did you do?" Her voice trembled. "When my husband found out that I had seen you again, he lost his mind. He became controlling. Dangerous. He wanted proof that I was loyal to him. He wanted another baby. But I wanted yours, not his." My chest tightened, breath shallow. The cafe faded. The world shrank to Sharon's shaking voice. "So I told him I was pregnant," she whispered, "even though I wasn't. Yet, my pulse pounded in my ears. I tracked your schedule. I found you outside the courthouse that day, pretending to bump into you. And when we slept together again, I closed my eyes. A memory rushed back. A moment of weakness, two adults clinging to familiar pain and familiar warmth, thinking it meant something. I'd regretted it for years. When I found out I was pregnant with twins," Sharon continued, "I thought they were yours. I was sure they were yours. They looked like you. They had your eyes. But then," her face crumpled, "my husband saw the resemblance too. And she swallowed. He forced a private paternity test. Without my knowledge. When the results came back negative, he went mad. He threatened to take the girls from me. To ruin you. To destroy your career." My hands curled into fists. "So he got me fired," I said. Sharon nodded desperately. "He wanted you out of our lives forever. And he succeeded." For a long moment, silence stretched between us. Heavy. Suffocating. "So, Sandra and Susan," I finally said, "they're not mine." "No," Sharon whispered. "But they were meant to be your daughters. I wish they had been." Something deep inside me twisted at that. Grief for a life that could have been. For children that could have been mine. For the years stolen by betrayal, manipulation, and silence. But the story wasn't over. "There's more," Sharon whispered. "Something far worse." I tensed. My husband switched the tests. My mind went blank. "What?" "He tampered with the results," she whispered. "He bribed the technician." I confronted him years later. He admitted it when we divorced. My heart hammered violently. So the test proving the girls weren't mine might have been fake. She nodded weakly. You might still be their father. The world tilted. Behind us, the clatter of cups and quiet hum of conversation continued, unaware that my entire reality had just fractured. I didn't know what was true anymore, Sharon said, and I was too afraid to come forward. Too ashamed. Too broken. Her voice cracked. But when I heard Susan was sick, when I heard Sandra went looking for you, I knew I couldn't let them face this alone. I stared at Sharon, searching for deception, but all I saw was ruin. The ruin of a woman who once loved fiercely and then spent 20 years drowning in the consequences. You need to tell the girls, I said quietly. I know, she whispered. I just didn't know how. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated. A notification popped up. DNA results ready. My pulse stopped. Sharon saw the look on my face. It's them, isn't it? I nodded. Go, she whispered, voice trembling. Whatever the truth is, they deserve it. Sandra and Susan were waiting in their apartment when I arrived. Sandra opened the door before I even knocked. Eyes wide, breath uneven. Is it here? She asked. It's here, I said softly. Susan was on the couch. Pale, fragile, hopeful. She clutched a pillow to her chest like armor. Sandra sat next to her, gripping her hand. I took a breath, so deep it hurt my ribs. Then I opened the envelope. The silence in that tiny living room was absolute. You are, I read slowly, voice tight, shaky, a 99.97% probability match. Sandra gasped. Susan broke. She burst into a sob, covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Her small, frail body shook with the force of it. Sandra grabbed me, clutching my jacket, crying into my shoulder. You're our dad, she choked. You're really our dad. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling her tremble against me. And then, a quiet voice, barely audible. Dad. I turned. Susan was looking at me with the most vulnerable, fragile hope I had ever seen. I knelt beside her. Yes, I said. I'm here. She threw her arms around me, weak but desperate, burying her face in my shoulder as her tears soaked through my shirt. For the first time in my life, I held my daughter. Both of them. And the world finally made sense. The next days moved quickly. With the truth out, everything accelerated. My family embraced the twins instantly. My mother bought groceries for their apartment. My father handled paperwork. Barbara scheduled consultations with specialists. We moved Susan to a private clinic within 24 hours. She cried when she saw her new room. Not because it was luxurious, but because for the first time, she felt safe. For the first time, someone fought for her. And the treatment began. I visited every day. Sandra never left her sister's side. We watched movies together, shared stories, built years of missing memories piece by piece. Even the nurses smiled when they saw us, a newly found family clinging together as if we'd always been one. But there was still something unfinished. Sharon. She came to the clinic one evening, standing hesitantly at the door. Sandra froze. Susan stiffened. The air grew sharp. I'm sorry, Sharon whispered. For everything. For all the years you lost. For the lies. For not protecting you. For failing you both. Sandra looked away, jaw tight. Susan stared at her mother for a long moment, then said quietly, You should have told us. I know, Sharon said, and I will spend the rest of my life making up for it. Sandra's voice cracked. We needed you. We needed the truth. I know, Sharon whispered again. Tears rolled down her cheeks. But I'm here now, if you'll allow me. Slowly, painfully slowly, the girls let her in. Not fully, not immediately, but enough. Enough to begin healing. 3 weeks later, the doctors announced a miracle. I was a compatible donor. Not perfect, but close enough to attempt a transplant. Sandra sobbed with relief. Sharon collapsed in a chair, covering her face with her hands. I simply nodded, knowing in my bones what I had to do. The day of the transplant, I sat in the hospital gown, staring at the 4-line being prepared. Sandra hugged me tightly. Thank you, Dad. Dad. The word hit harder than the needle. Susan whispered, You're saving my life. No, I said softly. I'm doing what any father would do. She smiled, weakly, beautifully. It's enough. The procedure lasted hours, and it worked. Slowly, painfully, cautiously, but it worked. Within weeks, color returned to Susan's cheeks. Strength returned to her voice. Her body accepted the transplant like it had been waiting for me all along. On a quiet morning, as sunlight streamed into the clinic room, she whispered, "I think I'm finally going to live." Sandra cried. I cried. Even Sharon cried. And in that moment, every betrayal, every wound, every lost year faded into something softer, something survivable, something forgiven. Months passed. Susan grew stronger. Sandra began college again. I rebuilt my life, this time with daughters, with family, with purpose. One evening, we visited the beach. Sandra filmed everything from memories she insisted on collecting because we have 20 years to catch up on. Susan sat on a blanket, wrapped in a sweater, watching the waves. "Dad," she said softly. "Yes." She smiled, eyes shining. "Thank you for finding us." I sat beside her. "You found me first." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "I guess," she whispered, "we found each other." Behind us, Sandra laughed as she chased the surf with my sister Barbara. Sharon watched from a distance, a small smile on her face. My parents sat under an umbrella, arguing fondly about the best flavor of ice cream. And for the first time in my life, everything felt complete. Whole, right? The world had tried to tear us apart. But in the end, truth won, blood won, family won. Even after 20 years of lies, betrayal, and loss, love won.